Okay, so picture this. In late 2025 and early 2026, an alliance that felt rock solid for decades just cracked wide open. A series of absolute bombshell events created this huge public rupture between the MAGA movement and Israel. Today, we're going to unpack the resignation, the war, and the conspiracy theory that shook this entire relationship to its core and why it really matters. And it all kicked off with this, an explosive public resignation from President Trump's top counterterrorism official, a guy named Joe Kent. Now, he didn't just quietly quit. He leveled an accusation that sent absolute shockwaves through Washington. He basically claimed a foreign power and its lobbyists had pushed America into a war. So how in the world did we get here? Well, it really boils down to three key events over just a few short months that set the stage for this political firestorm. First, you have the shocking assassination of a conservative star. Then, a massive joint military operation kicks off in the Middle East. And finally, that's what leads to the resignation we just talked about. Let's break it all down. So first up, let's look at the man who basically lit the fuse. Joe Kent wasn't just any government official, you see. His personal story gave him this unique platform, a kind of credibility that couldn't just be brushed aside. To really get why his resignation hit like a ton of bricks, you have to look at his background. This guy wasn't some desk jockey. He was a former Green Beret, tons of combat experience. But what's really crucial, what gives him this immense moral authority, is his personal history. His wife, Shannon, was killed in action in Syria. That kind of personal sacrifice gave him this powerful populist appeal. So when a guy like that speaks, people tend to listen.
And this right here, this is the heart of the conflict. On one side, you have Kent, who's framing himself as a whistleblower, a patriot who got sidelined for putting America's interests first. But then the White House fires back with a completely different story, that he was an out-of-the-loop official with a grudge. Two totally conflicting narratives, leaving everyone to decide who they wanted to believe.
Okay, so that's the accusation. Now let's talk about the war that sparked it all. To get why Kent's protest even happened, we have to understand the operation itself, Operation Epic Fury, which was this massive joint U.S.-Israel strike against Iran. On paper, the mission was sold as something clear and preemptive. The Trump administration told the American public this was a critical strike, that it was necessary to neutralize Iran's missile program and, this is the big one, to stop them from getting a nuclear bomb. But here's where the official story starts to get a little shaky. The world's top nuclear watchdog, the IAEA, came out and directly contradicted the administration's main justification. Their findings showed no active structural nuclear weapons program in Iran. And that intelligence gap, it became a huge point of contention, and it just fueled all the skepticism Kent was tapping into. And then, of course, there was the price tag. $18 billion for just the first 30 days. With the Pentagon already asking for $200 billion more, people started asking a really simple question. At a time when inflation is high, is this war actually worth the cost? And the cost wasn't just in dollars. The war had these immediate, very real consequences back home. We're talking human casualties, oil prices shooting up to levels we haven't seen since the 70s, and another spike in inflation. All of a sudden, this conflict wasn't some abstract foreign policy debate. It was hitting Americans directly in their wallets. And that brings us to the third piece of this puzzle. And honestly, this one's a wild ride. It's about the assassination of conservative leader Charlie Kirk back in late 2025. What everyone thought was a closed case of domestic political violence was about to be blown wide open. See, the FBI had their guy, a lone wolf, they said, motivated by left-wing ideology. The case seemed pretty straightforward. So the big question is, how did that story completely flip on its head and become this tale of international espionage and a foreign plot? Well, it flipped because of this, a text message leaked to the public that allegedly shows Charlie Kirk, just 2 days before he was killed, furious about losing a major donor. And that last sentence, I have no choice but to leave the pro-Israel camp. It became the absolute cornerstone of a massive new conspiracy theory. So suddenly, you have these two completely different realities laid out right next to each other. On one hand, you've got the FBI's official story of a lone assassin, all backed up by forensics and surveillance. And on the other, you have this explosive narrative pushed by Joe Kent and others that Kirk was silenced by a foreign nexus to stop him from breaking with the pro-Israel lobby. So you take the resignation, the war, and this wild conspiracy theory, and you put them all together, and it's like a political earthquake. They didn't just cause a media frenzy, they exposed this deep structural crack that had been forming inside the MAGA movement for years. And you can actually see this shift in the numbers. It's not just a feeling, the data is stark. Support for Israel within the Republican Party is no longer this monolithic thing. While older voters are still pretty steadfast, look at this. Support among conservatives under 35 has just plummeted. That's a massive generational shift. And this quote from a young conservative at CPAC just perfectly captures the feeling behind those numbers. For them, it's not really about ideology, it's about priorities. They're looking at billions of dollars going to a foreign war while they're at home struggling with debt and the price of gas. And this all feeds into this growing America First isolationist mindset. The thinking goes something like this. Foreign entanglements and aid are a drain on the country. The U.S. government should have one loyalty and one loyalty only. And these conflicts in the Middle East, they're seen as proxy wars that actually make America less safe, not more. So, where does all this leave us? Well, the fallout from this internal political battle has put one of America's most foundational foreign alliances on incredibly shaky ground. The future is anything but certain. And this isn't just talk. We're seeing real-world consequences. What used to be a given, bipartisan support for Israel, is now becoming a loyalty test in Republican primaries. You have candidates publicly rejecting donations from groups like IPAC to prove their America First credentials. And this could all lead to a much more transactional relationship, where any future aid might come with some very strict strings attached. And, we have to talk about a really serious risk here. As this whole debate gets more and more intense, there's a fine but really crucial line between a legitimate policy discussion about foreign influence and reviving some dangerous historical anti-Semitic tropes. All this language about foreign control or powerful lobbies can easily top into centuries-old conspiracy theories. Which really leaves us with this final critical question. The events of the last few months created this massive trust deficit, not just inside a political party, but between two allied nations. And when allies start looking at each other with that kind of suspicion, you have to ask yourself, who actually wins?